Hi everyone, my name is Maddie Arison. I am going to present to you my topic, which is CLABSI prevention in implanted ports. As just a little bit of review, we're going to go over what a CLABSI is, or a central line associated bloodstream infection. A CLABSI is defined as a primary bloodstream infection. This means that the infection has no other apparent source causing the infection, so we are assuming that it's coming from a central line. A central line, defined, can also be known as a central venous access catheter, a central venous access device, or just even a central venous catheter. I'm reviewing these with you just because I want to make sure everybody is on the same page and agrees that an implanted port is a central line. So a central line is something that is a catheter placed into a large vein in a critically ill patient or in those requiring prolonged IV therapies. So this is dialysis patients, this is ICU patients, and this is chemotherapy patients with their implanted ports. Just want you to keep that in mind while we move forward, because all of the data that is out there on CLABSIs combines all central lines into one, but as we now know, a port is most definitely a central line. The problem with CLABSIs is that they're occurring. They're occurring at a rate of about 250,000 CLABSIs a year in the United States. We learned that from the CDC. We also learned from the CDC that CLABSIs are 100% preventable. These are only occurring because healthcare workers, we are doing something improperly, causing them to occur. Each time a CLABSI occurs, there is a 0.15 excess death rate associated with it. So what that means is, for a total of every 1,000 CLABSIs cases, there are 150 excess deaths. Another way to say this is just basically saying that for every 1,000 CLABSIs, 150 people are going to die as a fact of just having an infection in their central line who otherwise would not have died. We get that information from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And on top of everything else, the financial consideration for a CLABSI, on average it costs $45,000 each. That varies obviously, could be $27,000 to $69,000 on average, and that cost can either be to the patient, to the healthcare organization, or insurance. To give you guys a little bit of background information, I work at Carson Tahoe Hospital in Carson City, Nevada. We deal with implanted ports frequently on a medical oncology floor. Over a year ago, we developed a vascular access team in response to elevated CLABSI rates that were occurring in our hospital. This vascular access team took over all central line care. So they started doing Wednesday dressing changes on all central lines. They implemented using a 2-person method. They also started following approved guidelines and using checklists during these insertions and dressing changes. But they didn't include ports. They did not include implanted ports in their dressing changes, in their accessing programs following those guidelines. They forgot about them. So the current management of a port at Carson Tahoe Hospital involves taking a staff nurse who's been approved to access ports, who's had the education and the training, taking them off the floor to go and help out somebody else. Teamwork is not the problem here. It is just that while this is acceptable, only one person going and accessing that port is not best practice. There are multiple agencies, including the CDC, the Joint Commission, SHEA, which is the Society for Healthcare Epidemiology of America, who have all put out guidelines and recommendations that involve using 2 staff members to handle central line care. What's important about this population is that they are a higher risk population. They are usually immunocompromised because they are receiving chemotherapy through their implanted port. And then just because of that fact alone, their mortality rate is going to be much, much higher, which increases their risk for having a CLABSI occur in the first place. This developed my PICOT question that I've been using for this class, which would be, in patients with an implanted port, Will the expansion of the 2-person vascular access team protocol compared to the current management of ports further reduce the rate of CLABSIs within a year at Carson Tahoe Hospital? During my literature review, I learned from the CDC, the Joint Commission, and from SHEA that all of these guidelines recommend using a 2-person method for central line care. Why this is happening for all of their guidelines, the common theme throughout is that there is one person, the inserter, and the second person is the observer, who is using the checklist to maintain an aseptic technique and maintain the proper protocol for doing all central line care, whether it be a PICC insertion, a port access, or a dressing change. In addition to these 3, we also see from AHRQ, which is the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality again, and also from Johns Hopkins Medicine. They have also put out checklists and guidelines that recommend this use of 2 staff members during all central line care to help maintain sterility and hopefully further prevent CLABSI rates from occurring. With all of this being said, I've developed the following community diagnosis. This is risk for infection related to improper port accessing technique. Our goal would be complete eradication of CLABSIs at Carson Tahoe Hospital. In order to achieve this goal, we're going to add ports into the vascular access team's protocol. We're going to answer this call to action. There are going to be 4 steps in here that we're going to follow in order to accomplish this. The first is to gather feedback about the current management of ports from both staff members and from patients alike. Then we're going to launch an education plan for the vascular access team because they need to have proper education in handling ports. Third, once they have finished their education, they will go through a credentialing program which involves being checked off and being approved to do this. And last but not least, we will evaluate the effectiveness of this education. After we've gathered the feedback, we'll come to step 2, which is the education development. We're going to formulate an education plan that involves the vascular access team, current people who are accessing ports, and the education department so that we can gather together and develop a skills day in order to practice this skill of accessing an implanted port. During the skills day, vascular access team members will be able to practice with hands-on practice on a dummy using a port access and a dressing change, while a second person is practicing with a checklist and going through each of those steps with those people so that both people are familiar with each side of accessing and using the checklist. At the end, I could also imagine using a written short quiz just to make sure everybody individually is on the same page. The education plan, which is that credentialing program that I was talking about, this involves being checked off or meeting the requirements to finally do something on your own with your trained observer. At CTH, they currently only require 3 successful port accesses to be deemed competent, but I also learned in my literature review that Joint Commission and ARHQ both suggest 5 successful procedures of each type of central line. So that would be like PICCs, or just like a femoral or jugular, or ports. Each of those needs 5 successful accesses, dressing changes, techniques in order to be considered competent. The education timeline that I have kind of tentatively put out would be that the vascular access team to be complete with their credentialing program by the end of this year, which would be December 2021. And then by January 1st of 2022 would be our go-live time, that all care for central lines would be under the vascular access team, including ports. At the end of this, and after some time to give it the year that I had predicted in my PICOT question, we would evaluate, we would compare the CLABSI rates before and after expansion of this team. Then we would audit the use of checklists, make sure that they were complete, and make sure there was adherence to aseptic technique. In these checklists, you'll see later that I have some links to them. This just shows you whether it's yes, they completed it correctly, or yes, it was with some coaching in order to maintain sterility. Then again, we'll get some feedback from the patients and from the staff, and I kind of assumed that we would use like a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree, to before and after the expansion of this team to see if this was improving their outcomes. So in summary, my proposal would be that the current management of ports would be changed. The expansion of the vascular access team protocol to include implanted ports to further reduce our CLABSI rates, improve patient mortality, and remain current with best practice advisories by using these checklists. This is just that link to those checklists that I was telling you about. They're very small and hard to read on a PowerPoint, so I'll make sure that I link them here and that you are also going to have them attached when you review my video. Last but not least, now that I'm a little over, I just want to see if anybody has any questions. You can drop them on the comments. I will address each one if I see them and do my best to answer any of those questions that you have, so please bring them to me. Last but not least, this is just my reference page to give you guys some links to where I got these checklists, where I got this information. And thank you for letting me do this presentation. Thank you for your feedback.